Naomi Carter's hands trembled as she clutched the thin stack of papers in her lap. The courtroom was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of papers or the scratch of pens on notepads. Judge Walter Graves peered down at her from the bench, his icy gaze piercing through the room like a winter storm. "Ms. Carter," the judge's voice boomed, sharp and impatient, "state your case." Naomi swallowed hard. Her voice cracked as she began to speak. "Your Honor, I'm here today because my landlord—" "Get to the point," Graves interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "We don't have all day." The humiliation burned through her, but Naomi pushed forward. "My landlord evicted me because I reported unsafe living conditions. He said I was causing problems." "And you have proof of this alleged discrimination?" Graves leaned back, his lips curling into the faintest smirk. Naomi hesitated. "I have witnesses, and the city inspector—" "Witnesses can be unreliable," Graves cut her off again. "I see no concrete evidence here." The air left her lungs. She could hear whispers from the gallery behind her, but the judge silenced them with a single glare. Naomi's lawyer stood, trying to object, but Graves raised a hand. "Enough. This case is dismissed." Naomi froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of those words sank in. She turned to her lawyer, who looked just as stunned. The judge had barely heard her out. As she gathered her papers and walked out of the courtroom, the sting of tears blurred her vision. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. Behind her, a woman in the gallery pressed "record" on her phone, capturing the judge's cold dismissal. The video would change everything. The video began circulating on social media mere hours after Naomi walked out of the courtroom. The woman who had recorded it, frustrated by the blatant unfairness, captioned the video. "Judge dismisses Black mother's case without hearing her. This is systemic racism in action." It didn't take long for the video to catch fire. By the end of the day, it had been viewed tens of thousands of times, with hashtags like #JusticeForNaomi and #FireJudgeGraves trending. The clip was raw and emotional. Naomi's quiet determination was contrasted by Judge Graves's cold smirk and dismissive tone. Online, outrage boiled over. "How is this even legal?" one user commented. "Someone get this woman a good lawyer," wrote another. "This judge needs to be investigated ASAP," said a third. Among those watching was Jasmine Alvarez, an up-and-coming journalist known for exposing injustices. She stared at the video, her coffee untouched as her mind raced. This wasn't just a story. It was a symbol of a much larger problem. Jasmine clicked on the uploader's profile, sent a direct message, and began preparing for an interview. Meanwhile, Naomi sat in her car with Layla asleep in the back seat, unaware of the storm brewing online. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, but she ignored it, overwhelmed by the day's events. She stared blankly at the windshield, replaying the judge's words in her mind. Dismissed. The following morning, a knock on her car window startled her. She lowered it cautiously, greeted by a warm smile. "Ms. Carter, I'm Jasmine Alvarez, a journalist. People are talking about what happened to you. I think your story could change everything." Naomi hesitated, but nodded. For the first time in a while, hope flickered. Naomi's interview with Jasmine Alvarez aired the following day, accompanied by the now viral courtroom footage. Naomi's voice was soft but resolute as she recounted the events that led her to the courtroom, the eviction, the unsafe conditions, and the judge's dismissal. Layla sat quietly beside her, clutching a worn teddy bear. It was the image of her daughter that struck a chord with viewers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across social media, people rallied behind Naomi. Her story was shared by influencers, activists, and even celebrities, all calling for accountability. The hashtags #JusticeForNaomi and #HoldGravesAccountable were trending within hours. Donations poured in through a fundraiser set up by Jasmine, enough to get Naomi and Layla out of their car and into a motel room for the time being. Meanwhile, the pressure on Judge Graves was mounting. Local reporters swarmed the courthouse and protesters lined the steps with signs that read, "We see your bias," and "Justice for all, not just some." Graves, watching from the safety of his chambers, waved off the commotion. "It's a media circus," he muttered to his clerk. "Nothing more." But the calls for an investigation were growing louder. Civil rights organizations demanded a review of Graves' cases, particularly those involving marginalized individuals. His email inbox was flooded with messages, some polite, others far from it. Jasmine's piece ended with a powerful statement. "This isn't just about one woman or one judge. This is about a system that allows injustice to flourish. And if enough of us stand up, we can change it." As Naomi tucked Layla into bed that night, her phone buzzed with a notification. A prominent civil rights attorney wanted to take her case. For the first time, it felt like the tide might turn. Judge Walter Graves sat stiffly in his study, the warm glow of his desk lamp doing little to calm his nerves. The nightly news blared on the television, and there he was, his face splashed across the screen alongside headlines that screamed, "Judge dismisses mother's plea amid bias allegations." He scoffed, trying to maintain his usual air of control. "Ridiculous," he muttered, sipping his whiskey. "Just a bunch of internet outrage. It'll fade by next week." But the relentless buzz of his phone told a different story. His inbox was flooded with emails, some demanding his resignation, others filled with thinly veiled threats. Even his colleagues had begun to distance themselves, some offering cautious words of advice. "This might not blow over, Walter. You need to prepare." Meanwhile, Naomi's story was everywhere. Civil rights attorney Malik Bennett, known for tackling high-profile cases, had announced he was taking Naomi's case pro bono. His statement, delivered in front of a crowd of protesters outside the courthouse, was clear. "This isn't just about one ruling. It's about dismantling a system that protects bias and punishes those who dare to speak out." Inside the courthouse, the walls seemed to close in on Graves. The noise from the protesters echoed down the hall, their chants growing louder. "Justice for Naomi." His staff avoided eye contact, and even his trusted clerk looked uneasy. But it wasn't just the public that was closing in. A journalist from a prominent outlet had begun digging into his past, uncovering a troubling pattern of rulings against marginalized communities. Graves stared at the stack of letters piling up on his desk, each one a reminder that his past was catching up to him. For the first time, the judge felt the weight of fear. Naomi sat at a small desk in her motel room, staring at her laptop as emails and messages poured in. Support from strangers, activists, and even celebrities left her overwhelmed. Each new notification carried words of encouragement, offers of help, or stories from others who had faced similar injustices. Layla played quietly on the bed, her giggles a small reminder that hope still lingered. On the other side of the city, attorney Malik Bennett prepared for the battle ahead. His office was buzzing with activity as his team reviewed Naomi's case and began compiling evidence to expose Judge Graves's history of biased rulings. Malik's voice was steady but sharp as he addressed his staff. "This isn't just about Naomi. This is about sending a message. No one is above accountability." The media frenzy surrounding the case grew stronger. News outlets replayed clips of Naomi's courtroom humiliation alongside interviews with activists and legal experts. Each time her story aired, it added more fuel to the fire. The public's outrage wasn't just about the judge's actions, it was about the broken system he represented. Judge Graves felt the walls closing in. At home, his wife barely spoke to him, their once unshakable facade cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. Protesters now gathered outside his gated community, chanting relentlessly. His neighbors avoided him. His colleagues whispered behind his back. But Naomi's newfound voice refused to be silenced. During a live interview, she spoke directly to the camera. "This fight isn't just for me. It's for my daughter. It's for every mother who's been told her voice doesn't matter, and it's for every person who's been ignored by the system. Together, we can change this." Her words rippled across the nation, igniting something Graves could no longer ignore. Judge Walter Graves sat in his dimly lit office, the protest chants from outside faintly audible through the thick courthouse walls. His hand trembled slightly as he opened yet another envelope from the growing pile on his desk. The letters had started arriving a week ago, each one more personal and damning than the last. This one read, "Judge Graves, do you remember the 17-year-old boy you sentenced to 15 years for stealing a backpack? That boy was my brother. He's out now, but his life is ruined. How many others have you done this to?" Graves set the letter down, his stomach twisting. His clerk knocked softly and entered the room. "Sir, the media is requesting a statement, and Malik Bennett's team has officially filed a motion to reopen the Carter case." Graves dismissed the clerk with a wave, but the words lingered. A motion to reopen? That meant public scrutiny on a level he'd never faced before. His carefully constructed legacy, decades of rulings, accolades, and respect, was now under threat. The walls seemed to close in. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi met with Malik and his team. Malik slid a folder across the table. "We've uncovered a pattern in Graves' rulings," he said. "He's disproportionately ruled against people of color, particularly women. This isn't just bias, it's systemic negligence." Naomi flipped through the documents, her pulse quickening. For the first time, she saw tangible proof that this fight wasn't just about her. It was bigger. Back at the courthouse, Graves stared at his reflection in the window, his normally confident demeanor cracking. He remembered his father's harsh words growing up. "Never show weakness, son. Power is all that matters." But now, for the first time in his career, Graves felt powerless. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and curious citizens filled the benches, all waiting for the moment Judge Graves would take his seat. The tension was electric, with whispers and camera flashes breaking the otherwise suffocating silence. At the center of it all sat Naomi Carter, her back straight and her resolve unshaken. Beside her, Malik Bennett reviewed his notes, his presence a calm but commanding force. As Graves entered, the room fell silent. His face was stoic, but his steps were heavier than usual. He could feel the weight of every gaze fixed on him, judging him, questioning him. For years he had ruled from the bench with an air of unshakable authority. Now, that authority felt precariously close to crumbling. Malik stood, his voice steady and powerful. "Your Honor, we are here to expose a systemic failure, a pattern of rulings that have harmed the very people our judicial system is meant to protect. This case isn't just about Naomi Carter. It's about a judge who has consistently dismissed the voices of the marginalized." Graves' hands tightened on the edge of his desk, but he said nothing. Malik presented the evidence. Dozens of cases where Graves had ruled unfairly against black defendants and plaintiffs, his biases laid bare for the courtroom to see. The room was silent, save for the clicking of cameras and the occasional murmur. Naomi's turn came to speak. She stood, her voice trembling but firm. "I didn't come here to destroy a man. I came here to fight for justice, not just for me, but for every person who's been silenced." The words hung in the air. Graves shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the courtroom felt less like his domain and more like a reckoning. Judge Graves sat at the bench, his jaw clenched as the weight of the evidence mounted. Malik Bennett's presentation was meticulous, each piece of evidence sharper than the last. Charts, rulings, and testimonies painted a damning picture. Graves had disproportionately ruled against marginalized groups for decades. The room felt heavier with each revelation. Naomi sat quietly, watching the man who had dismissed her so easily squirm under the scrutiny of his own actions. The crowd in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably, murmuring as they absorbed the extent of the judge's bias. Even Graves' own defense attorney looked pale. fumbling for words to counter the mounting accusations. But the turning point came when a former defendant, Derek Marshall, took the stand. A middle-aged black man with tired eyes, Derek recounted his story. A wrongful conviction on flimsy evidence, with Graves presiding over his trial. "I was just a kid," Derek said, his voice steady but emotional. 18 years old. I begged for a chance to prove my innocence, but Judge Graves looked at me like I wasn't even human. He gave me 20 years without a second thought. That decision destroyed my life. The courtroom fell silent. Graves stared at the table in front of him, his usual defiance nowhere to be found. Derek's words pierced through the room, leaving no doubt about the judge's culpability. As Malik wrapped up his arguments, he delivered a final blow. "Your Honor, this is not about revenge. It's about accountability. Naomi Carter deserves justice, and this courtroom deserves a judge who serves the law, not their own prejudices." Graves called for a recess, his voice unsteady. As he retreated to his chambers, he realized that the walls he had built to protect himself were finally collapsing. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Judge Graves returned from recess. His normally commanding presence was absent, replaced by a man who seemed smaller, his shoulders slumped under the weight of the accusations. The tension in the room was palpable, every eye fixed on him as he took his seat. Graves cleared his throat, his voice faltering. "Before we proceed, I have something to say." The room fell silent. Naomi's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as she leaned forward. Graves looked out at the packed courtroom, his face pale. "For decades, I believed I was a fair and impartial judge. I convinced myself that my rulings were just, that my authority was absolute. But today, I've been forced to confront something I never wanted to see, my own prejudice." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Graves paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I failed you, Miss Carter. I failed countless others who came before me seeking justice. And, for that, I am deeply sorry." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. The apology felt heavy with regret, but it wasn't enough to erase the harm he had caused. Graves turned to address the gallery. "I know that words are not enough. I will be stepping down as judge, effective immediately. I also support the motion to reopen this case, with a new judge presiding." The courtroom erupted, some cheering, others stunned into silence. Naomi gripped the edge of her seat, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, anger, and vindication. As Graves stood to leave the bench for the last time, he glanced at Naomi, his face etched with remorse. "I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." Naomi didn't respond. Justice was finally in motion. The courtroom cleared out slowly, the buzz of conversations and murmurs of disbelief lingering in the air. Naomi sat still, her hands trembling as she held on to the moment. She had fought so hard for this, and though the journey wasn't over, a weight had been lifted. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Malik Bennett placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Naomi. Your courage didn't just change your life, it's opened the door for so many others to seek justice." Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters cheered as Naomi stepped into the sunlight. Reporters surrounded her, microphones and cameras aimed at her face, but she raised her hand to silence them. Taking a deep breath, she spoke with clarity and strength. "This victory isn't just mine. It's for everyone who's ever been silenced, ignored, or dismissed. It's a reminder that change is possible when we stand together, speak up, and refuse to back down. But our fight isn't over. There are so many like me who still need their voices heard, and it's up to all of us to keep fighting for them." Her words echoed across social media and news outlets, inspiring others to come forward with their own stories. Judge Graves quietly retired from public life, his legacy forever tarnished. Meanwhile, Naomi used the funds raised during her case to start an organization dedicated to helping marginalized communities fight for justice. She named it Layla's Light, after her daughter, a beacon of hope for those in need. Naomi's story is a powerful reminder that injustice thrives in silence but can be dismantled through collective action. If you believe in equality and accountability, speak out. Support organizations fighting for justice, amplify marginalized voices, and hold those in power accountable. Together, we can create a fairer, more just world.